Last month, an article appeared in the New York Times titled, "How Long It Should Take to Grieve? Psychiatry Has Come Up with the Answer." Oh, when I hear a topic like that, it sounds like they have solved the problem for all of us. But what does this mean, and why did it get added to the Diagnostic Statistical Manual? Whenever I see a title that includes grief followed by some, quote, solution, I find myself deeply cringing. The propagation of this idea that grief, this profoundly human experience, could be done wrong is so unhelpful. This misconception is a real problem. When we have people struggling from their core and others coming forward with judgment, shame, and a complete misunderstanding of the experience, pushing rather than supporting, we really need to take a look at our understanding of this experience. It's frustrating to see people experiencing grief being pushed by others to, quote, get over it and move on, rather than looking for ways to help them and find their way in the experience. The absolute truth is everyone is grieving, regardless of whether the grieving comes from a loss of a person, a divorce, a job, an identity, a title, a location, not making the team, or any of the many ways that we experience loss. Grief is everywhere. Although the prolonged grief disorder diagnosis is specifically for the loss of a person, the attitude, judgment, and shame are universal and shared in many other types of loss. Regarding this disorder, grieving is related to the loss of someone you love. Please notice that I didn't say loved, because the person died, not the love. For my friends who may not make it to the end of this video, let me tell you the ending now. The grieving will last as long as you have love for that person. That's not abnormal. It does not mean you're doing it wrong or that you're broken. It means you're human. The idea that you should get, quote, over it, you're missing or longing for someone so significant to you is not wrong. This misunderstanding is why people are so mad about the new diagnosis and why you should care. Because it does have a significant impact on the quality of care that you or the person you care about will receive. After years of debate, the diagnosis of prolonged grief disorder was recently added to the DSM. So let's get into it. What does it mean? What is it? The diagnosis of prolonged grief disorder is a new diagnosis created by the American Psychiatric Association that describes a, quote, maladaptive response to loss, end of quote. To receive the diagnosis, someone must be at least 6 months past the initiating event, a death. Then they must be experiencing a persistent and pervasive longing for the deceased and or a persistent cognitive preoccupation with the deceased combined with any of the 10 additional grief reactions indicative of intense emotional pain at least 6 months after the initiating event. So what does that mean? Let's break that down a little bit. 1, the persistent cognitive preoccupation, which simply means you think of the person that you lost pretty regularly since they died. And 2, persistent and pervasive longing means you're missing that person and you wish they were still here with you 6 months after the death. If you've checked the box for one or both of these, you only need one more thing from the list. And these things are called a grief action indicative of emotional pain to be diagnosed with this disorder. The list includes sadness, guilt, anger, denial, meaning that you're having difficulty accepting the death, feeling like you lost a part of yourself in the loss, an inability to experience a positive mood, emotional numbness, or difficulty engaging in social activities. So according to this industry standard manual given to all medical providers, you now qualify for a disorder if you pick one more of those. If you were still sad about someone's death 6 months after they died, you miss them, you think about them all the time, and you're having a hard time being cheerful and wanting to go socialize, you now have a disorder. It's hard to not get enraged when you read that criteria. The perspective that a person should contain their loss within months is not only damaging to self-identified people with grief, but rather our entire community. It directly impacts the type and quality of care that you or anyone you love will receive. If the medical community position is that if you're still missing the person you love, you are still talking about them, you're still having feelings, and you're sad after 6 months, you now have a disorder, then the general public begins to think that you have a problem. An example of this is one of my clients. She's a mom with 2 kids in elementary school who lost her husband nearly 8 months ago. At first, her entire family was supportive. However, as each month passed, her mother and sister began to increase the pressure on her to get over the loss. Mainly the sister started to pressure her with statements like, "You're not getting any younger," and "the kids need a father." As we worked through not only the loss, but her boundaries with her family, she began to feel much better about herself and began to see the path that she was beginning to go down. But when the New York Times article came out, and her family, along with a couple other friends, sent her the link and shared a version of, "The medical community says I was right. You need to get out there." She started to second guess herself and her feelings. She started ruminating on, am I a terrible mom? Will anyone ever want me if there's something wrong with me? When the medical industry says that grief is a disorder and we're not handling it correctly, our society begins to be emboldened and to pressure people to, quote, get over it and move on already. Primarily because dealing with the issue around death makes them uncomfortable. I believe that grief is as personal as our relationships. There is no way to do grief wrong, and the suffering will last as long as the love endures. It's not an illness, it's being human. This new diagnosis continues to feed our culture's fear of death. The grief is not the problem that needs a solution. Grief is an experience that needs to be validated, honored, and better understood. The belief that sadness is always unhealthy and the need for you to return to this happy-go-lucky self after losing someone that meant so much to you is a disorder. Oh, it's just so wrong. Those beliefs that somehow being human is wrong are the real problem. Unfortunately, what gets reinforced in the general public's view is that if someone loses someone they love, the best thing that we can do is go cheer them up and get them over it. And let's help them, because if they get stuck, then there must be a problem to be solved. Grief is a reasonable, healthy response to loss. It will not be over in 6 months, a year, or 2. You will miss the person possibly for the rest of your life, which is okay. Being shamed into hiding for missing your person doesn't and hasn't helped anyone. Yes, our Western civilization has become a grief-averse society, but why would they go to the length to call it a disorder? To look at that, we need to take a look at the money. The insurance industry drives our medical system, and for the medical providers to bill for their services, they must be stated as a disorder. The DSM, or Catalog of Conditions, identifies what services the insurance company is willing to pay for. So, your medical professional will only get paid as long as you have the label of prolonged grief disorder. So, to get the help you need after losing your person, you must agree that you have a disorder. If the medical community stated that this is a normal condition and that it's healthy to grieve, insurance companies would not pay. You must agree that you're broken, and the provider must say that they can fix you before they're going to get paid for the support. A better alternative to this would be if we come together and push insurance companies to support the people instead of just simply labeling them. In addition to the medical providers looking for reimbursement, some grievers also favor the diagnosis as a way to legitimize their grief. And how terrible is that? That these individuals are so desperate to find a shield of protection because they need to prove to others that they have the right to grieve. These people feel it legitimizes their feelings and their experience. To have a very normal, very messy, very complex emotional response to the loss of someone you love, someone that was so meaningful to you, To have that honored, acknowledged, and supported, you have to give yourself a disorder. To have the people around you take it seriously, to validate your struggle, you must be willing to take on this medical label. It's just not right. The worry is that some people going through this grief may not understand what this diagnosis really means and why it is there. The concern is that they now take on this idea that there's something wrong with them and they need to be fixed in addition to their loss. These people may already be struggling with decisions and feeling unsure and insecure, which is entirely understandable since the person they relied on, their mirror, their foundation, is not there. They may not have the clarity to understand how this does not apply to them, or the fortitude to resist the concept that they are broken when it's primarily a vehicle for the service provider to get paid. We need to become more understanding and loving and allow more space for people to be in their grief rather than finding ways to push them out of their grief. The time to revisit our popular traditions of dealing with grief and find more compassionate, truly supportive ways of viewing this very human experience is now.